from welcome everybody from Pasture for Life and from hopefully the Arboriculture Association as well to our session on trees on farms, trees in pasture, a tree man's perspective. And this really arose as a result of my meeting John Parker, who's Chief Executive of the Arboricultural Association, on a walk about trees in Stonehouse, where we both live. And I really thought it would be nice to have a look at trees on farms from a tree man's perspective rather than a farmer's perspective. Not that the latter isn't important, but you know we get quite a lot of views, farmers' views. So the opening slide. Well, this is a sort of a bit personal. That T20 you can see is a 1947 Fergie T20 petrol TVO. It's 75 years old now. It's the kind of thing I used to drive in the 1950s when I was a student. And I bought it about 25 years ago in the Slad Valley for 250 quid. It only had 3 wheels. And I renovated it with a friend. And then about 4 years ago, it was quite clear I couldn't drive this around where I live, otherwise I'd get shot by the motorists. So I gave it to Matt and Laura Elliott, who were just starting farming on the 100-acre National Trust farm up in the Cotswolds. And there it is. And I thought it was just such a good start to the evening. We've got, put the tractor one side, we've got the pasture, we've got the grazing animals, we've got the soil, and we've got the trees. And I just want to show a couple of slides as to why I wanted to talk about trees in pasture. This is a slide from Professor Ratan Lal, who recently was voted the most influential soil scientist in the world by the world's soil scientists. So someone to listen to. I thought is the circle on the top was so important, the integration of crops and trees with livestock. The next was, there's a lot of focus on the carbon cycle, but I'm really interested in others are on the hydrological cycle, the work of Walter Jena, who's emphasizing the importance of transpiration and the cooling effect of that, and the vital role of vegetation in cooling the planet, not just through carbon, but through the cooling effect of transpiration. And given the historic loss of vegetation, the importance of getting vegetation back, and particularly trees, for all the reasons we're aware of. Now this one, this is from the IPCC, and on the this is the storage of carbon to a depth of 1 meter in soils as well as above ground. And as you can see, the third on the left is the temperate forest. Clearly quite a lot of carbon stored above ground and a bit more underground. Of course, that above ground is vulnerable to disease and to fire. We then come across to the number 6, the 6 from the left, temperate grasslands. And you can see relatively little above ground, not surprisingly, a very significant carbon storage beneath in the soil. And instead of arguing, as people often do, that trees are better than pasture or whatever it is, why don't we bring them all together? And hence trees in pasture. And then this one really is just, again, bringing it together. Sequestering carbon is not a question of trees or pasture, but both trees and pasture. So that's by way of introduction. And before we go on to John talking about his perception of trees on farms, I thought it'd be really good to have a farmer's perspective, given that we have a number of people present who are from the Arboriculture Association, who are tree people, and I thought it would be good to start off with a farmer's perspective. Ollie Farms down in Devon. He was recently on Costing the Earth on the BBC. and which was great, Ollie. And just a week ago, we had a webinar on agroforestry, on farms, farmers' perspectives, and we'll put the link on there later so that you can have a look at that, the lessons we learned from Denise and Rich and George Young. So Ollie, let me pass the ball to you, and then we'll go on from there to John. Thank you.
Great. Well, hi, welcome. I'm Ollie. Thanks, John. Great intro. Hopefully you can see these slides. I'm obviously in slideshow mode. So look, here's a lovely veteran oak tree with a
Ollie,
bank.
I think your screen is sharing, sorry.
Okay, hang on. Screen sharing. Zoom. Where are we here? Screen. PowerPoint. Here we are.
There we go. Something's loaded up.
There we go. It's up. Right. I just got to minimize Zoom a second while we come to this Zoom. Right, Zoom slideshow. Hopefully this is it. Can you see that? Is that okay? Is that working?
Looks great.
Great. Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah. So look, I'm Ollie. I'm from Messebeer Farm. I've been here for about 7 years. Oh, why is that gone? Oh. Okay, so I hope you're all coping with the cold weather if you are farming. Here's a shot of our cattle emerging from a stand of Leylandi. This is a kind of green barn area on our farm. And the cattle are still out, which is great. And that's an amenity planting, I should think, which was put in about 30 years ago. Here's our farm from the air. We're in North Devon, we're in Witheridge. Just give you an overview of some of our land parcels, the sort of sizes. We run down to a river valley. About 70% of our boundary is a river through the bottom. So we've got gently south facing, sloping towards a river catchment. Our woodlands, so we have a woodland management plan in place. We had some help from Ward Forester, Mick Bracken, who many of you may know. He helped us a while ago to put this together. But essentially, the compartments are 7 hectares of woodland, 4.84 of broadleaf and 2.16 of conifer. So out of 93 hectares, we have a 7 hectare amount of woodland. And there's a great variation of habitat there. And on the left, we've got a habitat map, which would be detailing some of those habitats which are here. And the farm is very old. It's in the Doomsday Book, in fact. So yeah, there's been people on the land for a long time. And in order to get a grasp on woodland, we looked back to go forward. Any good ploughman will tell you, you've got to do that. So this is a 1946 aerial photograph. It's just chucked up with a few different habitats there. If you look at the purple lines up at the top of the image, you'll see some banks, hedge banks, which were actually missing. And I think between the wartime era and probably 1980s, those banks were run down and removed. And there's evidence that the plough was put into these kind of areas of traditional meadow and moorland. So part of our work was to reinstate and build back some of those earth banks. Maps are great love. I mean, this is a little bit eclectic and a bit crazy, but you've got to use maps to guide you, haven't you? You all know that. On the left, if I go through the colours of just what my thinking is, red, this is a earth bank which we have restored and rebuilt using 16-ton diggers, and those are across the farm. And I think I'd be right in saying there's about kilometers of those. There's about 15 kilometers of banks on the farm, but a few were missing. Coming down, the areas in blue are hedges that have been laid. Areas in yellow, these blocks, they are compartments of woodland which can be used as green barns. So animals can enter them, can shelter and make the most of them. And there's broadleaf and there is conifer. The little green circles, we hope to begin some agroforestry in the future, and those are circular plantings which will be built up in some of those compartments to help us break up pastures. The white lines will be alley cropping, and we'll hopefully be working with something like goat willow, but also a system of planting with oaks and apples, oaks every 40 meters. So we will actually revert to a sort of parkland over 100 years. It's a concept I'm not quite comfortable with, but my head's coming around to it. And hopefully in the next couple of years, we will begin to roll out some of this. What have I not said? Green. Green is an earth bank that we'll be building up and remaking this year, hopefully. So that gives you an overview of some of the different work that's going on. The map on the right is similar. It's just dividing up. It's just how we were working to get to where we want to be. Here's the 1946 map in its entirety of the area. And what I love about this is you can just begin to see land delineated by these lovely curving, sweeping lines. You can track them right through our farm. And I think man's been putting his mark on the landscape for millennia, really. We know that from evidence on the farm, and it's a landscape that would have been heavily wooded at one time, but it's generally, you know, it's over the hundreds of years we've had such a hunger for timber that it's been eroded and run down, and infrastructure's been put in the way of earth banks, and Devon's a great example of that. A couple of things that caught my eye here. We've got Helen Borowska, who's on Twitter, and she had this lovely conversation going last week with her brother about discovering, her brother's a historian, and he was informing her and telling her about these Iron Age banks and how they're ghosts in the land, the shapes of the lanes and the fields, they allude to so much that was there in the past. And in my hand here are 3 flints, which I found on a high pasture in the farm. And this is a high place with a water source, a good outlook. And within a kilometre of where I found those, there is ancient burrows and tumuli. So we don't have flint in our association of soil. So, and it's clear that they are flint tools, the plough through them up. Here's our fen meadow. This is running through the valley adjacent to the watercourse, and you can see lots of willow and hazel scrub. It's a wonderful habitat down here. We have things like willow tits, nuthatch, fritillary butterflies, lots of standing deadwood. It's a microcosm within there, and it's managed carefully. But you can also see later additions. There's stands of conifer in the background, and I think there's maybe a western red cedar on the right there. Again, amenity plantings around ponds. Why do we need trees? Well, here's the same view, two places. The river is in full flow, a brown chocolate soup. Unfortunately, you know, all the land north of us was moorland traditionally, and over 200 years, I suspect that has been intensively drained and cropped. And now when the river rises, it rises rapidly. And in fact, if we can slow the flow and we can have initiatives over the next 10 years, whether that's woody dams or getting landowners on board to reconsider how they manage their land, then that would be wonderful. Incidentally, the area that runs through the valley is a backwater sluice, so that water comes into it and it will go away slowly. It will be a seasonally waterlogged soil. And along the riverbank, lots of ash, unfortunately, getting nibbled away by the dieback. DRIP is a little initiative. They're going to actually put 2 water sensors on the river. There's confluence of the Sturcombe and the Little Dart here, and those will be rolled out next year. But again, gathering that data is important to look at these high rainfall events, and when we need to, we have the data, then we can start to target where the problems come from, I guess. Woodlands, great for gathering people. We'll take any opportunity as a family and friends to have a children's party. Just thought I'd throw that in there. It's a great feeling being in the woods. Me and the Arboricultural Association. So I'm on the left doing my best Paddington Bear impression. And this is my dad, Mike Walker. And he ran a really great, successful company in Oxfordshire called Comprehensive Tree Care. He was a member of the Arboricultural Association for probably 35, 40 years. I did ask him to confirm, but he didn't get back to me. He's enjoying now a well-earned retirement in southern Spain. And look, here he is with his treasured Unimog. It's good to see John's Fergie. This was a standard family afternoon hauling some lumber. So yeah, you know where I've come from. That's in my background. And I think that ignited a passion for arboriculture and trees. And that goes on. Here I am reviewing a hedge that's been laid and 3 trees that we've kept on the farm. Boys and toys, we keep a few bits of kit on the farm. I have indulged. We have a chunker on the left, which is a Polish machine for taking brash out of laid hedgerows and anything up to a sort of 6-inch diameter. And that can go through that and be used as biomass, or in some other application. A wood chipper on the right. We do hire in a big wood chipper and a selection of saws to get jobs done. And it's not just me, the little ones are quite happy to join in that task as well. And it's a great opportunity for everyone. How can people engage planting a tree? They just love it. It's a wonderful feeling. It's a great memory. There's a few more of those. Everybody's on it. So we've done some of these hedge banks, as I mentioned, and here's a selection of things that have gone into these hedges. These are just on various screen grabs from various orders. I tried to go as diverse as I can with the mixes, really to provide food for birds. Certainly things like honeysuckle with dormice in mind. They use that to make their nests and bind it together. Scots pine, slightly unusual, but will have maybe an allelopathic effect within banks and help drive flies away. So yeah, we're trying to go with the traditional, but put a mix which could be used for biomass or cropping when we lay perhaps on a 20-year rotation. So what do the banks look like? You go on the left from something which looks pretty awful to something that looks quite regimented, and that just grows. And it amazed me when you put the earth bank back, the first things that colonize it are the invertebrates. You go there within a couple of weeks and lift a stone and you'll find things making homes. And that's, for me, that was the start. That was really interesting and encouraging to see that, because you're providing that refuge. And now that bank looks like this, which is quite impressive in a few years. And you can see the diversity there. I think there's a wild cherry, a rowan, and a Scots pine. And it's looking really, really healthy. It's actually, yeah, it's really impressive. It's beautiful. And yeah. building up more banks. And, you know, when we built the banks, we had these little points which were delineating ancient bank lines, and that was in the way of these oak trees. So this oak tree was just standing in the middle of a field, but there was so much more to it. It's a path, and we were able to reconstruct what was lost. I'm moving on to apples now. So I'm quite passionate about this old apple tree. It's was very neglected. We have done some formative pruning, and we brought in a specialist to do that. 2 days of climbing, and we knocked it back by 50%, really to save it from storm damage, because we were worried it would go over. It's certainly over 100 years old, and it produces a funny little apple. And I have collected scion material from that tree, 100 scions, since it was pruned, and the pruning has helped produce the fresh wood for that. So I'm keen that we save it. It's genetic material that's here on the farm. It's quite unique, and the uniqueness has been proved by this year's DNA apple scheme. And we submitted 3 samples from the farm, and of those 3, 2 came back as no other match. So that means they are undiscovered. They are unique to this farm, and they're probably very old, and they're just tipping the hat to what was actually going on here a few hundred years ago. So yeah, I have taken grafts from those, and we hope to have a couple of 100 trees going into the agroforestry in the next year or 2. And apples are great fun. It's a great way, again, to gather people and maybe to have some form of diversification on the farm. And everybody loves getting involved in that and, yeah, enjoying the fruits of the labour. Here's an orchard. So under the stewardship, we put in or reinstated an ancient orchard. As 80 trees have gone in, and they're all heritage varieties. In the snow, here in this image, we've got fiddle copse across the valley in the background, which is a lovely stand plantation that provides a lot of shelter for livestock. What are we using our wood for on the farm? We run a biomass boiler, 40 kilowatt big ass boiler that keeps us warm and keeps everybody happy, but it does require a bit of work. So if we can lay our hedges on rotation and clear up any wind blow. The timber that's in the stand there came up from along the river. The Rivers Trust wanted to reduce the tunnelling to increase the fish migration and spawning. So some of the wood was multi-stem coppice from a riverbank in order to let more light into the riffles. And it was a great project to do. We're also using wood chip for bedding our cattle. So contractors come in this year with a frighteningly big machine. And this is hemlock from down in Exeter Way. It's come out of a woodland. We bought it in. We don't have enough conifer to satisfy that, but there you are. There's carbon coming onto the farm, and it's going to be part of the dung, and that will eventually, once rotted down, go back onto the farm and increase organic matter and help keep moisture. Here's some tunnelling that I was talking about that the Rivers Trust were keen to sort out. Woody debris is good in rivers, but where it obstructs the flow or would prevent or wash into bridges further down, which we have, it's important to remove it. And we did require, good contractor to come in and help with that. A couple of bits of inspiration. I love this. Richard Geraint Evans talking about an oak tree. 300 years it lives for, and there we go. I mean, he's drawing these trees and then he's dropping a GPS on where they are. Absolutely gorgeous. Check him out on Twitter if you're on. And another one that caught the eye, Guy's Shrub Skull. He's got this lovely book. Put it on the Christmas list, hey? Britain's lost rainforests. I mean, that is fascinating. That is really, really fascinating. Get into that, I think. Just going, what we were saying earlier, here's the drought. In the summer, we have soil temperatures of probably around about 28 degrees, and same day, literally 20 meters away under a tree, we're down at 8 degrees. So this agroforestry, this changing climate, planting trees in pasture is going to be essential, I would suggest. Cattle enjoying the shade and shelter under some poplars down by the river, cooler air. It's a good vibe. Same view just this morning. There's some timber there from Storm Eunice stacked up, actually some of the cedar which caught by the winds. And we can put cattle into our woodland as well. We've got a bale and rolling trailer. We can use that to take some species rich hay. We've got the dung going in and the cattle enjoying that space. Again, they are woodland creatures and they love it. And here's a green barn area where the cattle have been hiding out during these cold times. We've had -8 last night and probably again the same tonight. And you've got a stand of Leylandii actually on the right, probably used to drive pheasants over back in the 70s and 80s. But that's grown up to be a good barrier from the west. And then poplars and a few ash sitting behind and a void inside. Obviously a pheasant pen was situated within there, but it's provided a very valuable space for sheep that are lambing in the spring, but also cattle now, and it's great. It's the first year we've been able to use that. And that's the oak woodland, 7 acres of plantation. It's from 1900, so it survived both world wars, which is quite remarkable. But yeah, really useful, great space, and full of good habitat. Voids like this in trees are essential for bats and things like the nuthatch can use them. Small voids, really cool. And there's other things. Here we go. There's a nuthatch. Got a picture of him, and there's a debris pile there of brash and some rotting logs, which we try to leave those around the farm. And there's a fritillary butterfly there with some betony, all indicators of ancient woodland. And obviously that fritillary needs to be on the borders of broadleafs, as he's going to use that as his habitat. So all of this is really important.
Ollie.
That's me. I'm done.
Ollie,
Great.
thank you very much. That's really,
Welcome.
really inspiring. And we're going to go
Good.
straight on. You're giving us a very good starting point, and I'm going to go straight on to John. I'm just going to give a little bit. John's CV is at the beginning of the chat, but he's been Chief Executive Officer of the Arboricultural Association since July 2021 and was Technical Director from August 2019. More than 10 years of experience in public sector tree management. He's a chartered environmentalist, chartered forester, an associate member of the Royal Society of Biology. He's delivered a TED Talk entitled Why Trees Are Better Than People, which is available on YouTube. And in 2018, he was named Young European Urban Forester of the Year. And he's the founder of the Stonehouse Community Arboretum. Just to say, we live on the edge of the Cotswolds, which is full of pretty villages. And Stonehouse is a small industrial town, but we have an arboretum. And we are grateful to John for taking the leadership on that, as well as being a town councillor and chair of the local primary school. So John, over to you.
Thank you very much, John. Ollie, could you stop sharing your screen and then I can share mine? Brilliant, thank you. That was awesome, Ollie, by the way. I really enjoyed that. I think we're going to get you to come and do a webinar for the Arbor Association. We're going to poach you. Right. Let me do this now. Ba-ba-da-ba, ba-ba-da-ba. Can we see that? Ollie, can you see that? I can see, is that visible? Yeah, cool. Right. Hello, everybody. And thank you very much for joining us for this webinar. My name's John Parker, as John said. I'm Chief Executive Officer at the Arboricultural Association. We're a charity, and we're the professional membership organisation for people working in arboriculture, so working with tree care in the UK, but also increasingly around the world. We're an international organisation, and we're based in Stonehouse / Standish roundabouts, if you know the area, in the Cotswolds. So we're a lovely rural area. And whilst I'm certainly not an expert in farms, I know a bit about trees, and I spend a lot of time tramping around farms, normally trying to hide from the farmer. So this is very brave for me to be speaking to a group of farmers. And I should say this is kind of a bit of a random wander through my mind, and all opinions expressed are my own and not necessarily the association's. I do sometimes say things I shouldn't say, and I will try and behave myself as best I can. There's two big omissions in this. I knew there were omissions in it as I was doing it, but I realized very strongly earlier on, I don't really talk about soil, which is, some of my colleagues will say that's where it all starts, and that's the most important thing altogether. So apologies for that. And agroforestry. I'd very much like to learn more about agroforestry, but I don't really touch on it in this presentation. So I will learn. I know there's a webinar recently about that, which I will catch up on. So my background is this sort of tree. I work in arboriculture, amenity trees, so trees close to where people sort of live, work and play, typically in urban areas. And we take those lovely trees from where they want to be, and we go and dump them somewhere like this, some road in Camden, I think. And it can be pretty grim. It can be pretty sad because this isn't really where trees want to be. And this is normally what I do my presentations about, trees in urban areas. So this is a real treat. Sometimes we talk about trees in places like this, which is even more harsh for a tree. This is a train station in Italy somewhere. I can't remember where, but I thought that looked like a very sad, lonely tree, but doing a whole load of really, really good stuff nonetheless. So it's a really nice, refreshing change for me a couple of years ago when I moved back to Gloucestershire, back home to work at the Arb Association. Right in the middle of this picture, you might be able to see just the top of a roof. That's the Malt House, our office here in Standish. It's where I'm sat right now. Beautiful building, definitely haunted, but only by friendly ghosts, so it's okay. And we're surrounded, as you can see, by wonderful countryside. And it's much nicer to be here than it is in the city, I can assure you. I'm going to cough throughout. I've not got COVID, I'm just a very unhealthy man. So I've kind of divided this talk up into three parts, really. Opportunities, all the good stuff that trees do for us, why we like trees, why trees are great. Then the threats, some of the threats, particularly threats to trees, but also a few threats from trees, and why people sometimes feel a little bit uncomfortable about them, or pressured when they're responsible for them. And then hopefully at the end, some possible solutions. So we're going to go happy bit, sad bit, and then hopeful bit. And that's the exciting emotional roller coaster we are going to go on today. And let's start with the opportunities. Opportunities. Trees are great. Ollie's just given us a really good introduction to why trees are great and how it's possible to use them to your advantage on a farm. A lot of the time when I give presentations or when I talk to people, I'm explaining the benefits of trees in urban areas, or at least in, it could be in a town or a village, but where there's buildings and roads and all that sort of stuff. And we talk about amenity trees. We talk about the benefits of trees, environmental, social, economic benefits, sometimes collectively known as ecosystem services, a particularly sexy name that. But it's good things that trees do. And I was trying to think when I was putting this presentation together about what benefits there were from trees on farms, really. And I kind of decided that actually a lot of them are quite similar. We talk in urban areas about the fact that we need trees to give shade. We know that there's climate change. We know that things are getting pretty bad and they're going to get worse. We've just had a huge sort of heat wave and drought. Many of the trees around us here in Gloucestershire going into autumn colours and shedding their leaves as early as about August this year. It was very bizarre. Then a really, really long, mild autumn all the way up towards the end of November. And then suddenly in the last week or so, everything frozen. The temperature on my car said -8 this morning. So things are changing. Climate's changing. It's having a big effect. and we can use trees to try and mitigate some of the effects of climate change. And shade on a sunny day is an obvious one to us, and it's an obvious one to animals as well. And you can see some sheep here. This is a field just over there. I don't know why I'm looking, it's pitch black, but it's just over there, checking it's still there. And there's some sheep there sheltering. We know that trees do good stuff. They shelter our livestock. They help with water quality. They help control soil erosion. They can store carbon. They mitigate these effects of climate change. They can trap pollution like ammonia. They're really good for our air quality. And having done a bit of research, this is your area, not mine, but I was quite interested seeing some of the research showing, for example, that shelter from trees can boost lamb survival rates. So there's a definite benefit, it seems, from what I've read, from trees directly benefiting livestock. Another very intuitive one is shelter from the rain and from the other elements, not just sun. Obviously, I've used snow as an example here because it's a bit easier than showing the same picture of rain. This is in Westonbirt Arboretum, not in a farm. But you can see here, when it snows or when it rains, the tree canopy intercepts much of that precipitation and it holds it up there in the canopy. So a while after it snowed, and you see it all over the place at the moment, underneath trees, either it's slightly warmer potentially under there maybe, so it's a bit more sheltered, and also the snow's not getting down there. And the same thing happens with water. We get a lot of bad flooding down around me here in Stonehouse. And what tends to happen is a huge catchment area landing on a lot of farmland, and it's then running off the fields. There's a few hedges, a few trees, but it's largely just open, arable, runs straight off there, down onto the road, floods the road, can't get through the culverts, and then causes all sorts of problems for people. The more trees we can plant, the more trees we can establish, the greater canopy we can grow, the more water we're intercepting and preventing those problems further down the line. So farms and farmers have an absolutely critical role to play, not just on their farms, but for the wider environment around them as well. And of course, trees are also used to manage water. You often see these are lovely pollarded willows planted along watercourses all over the place. And we know that willows take up huge amounts of water from the ground, and sometimes have been planted to dry that ground out and control the waterways a little bit. And then pollarded like this, probably historically for some kind of timber production, now possibly just out of habit so they don't start falling apart. But it's a really beautiful sight. A lot of my international friends think pollarding is torturing and butchering trees. Personally, I think there's something very beautiful about it. And it's also something we use in urban areas. This is the globe willow in Stonehouse, the best inspected tree in Stonehouse, because I look at it from outside the globe as regularly as I possibly can. And we manage this tree also through pollarding. So it's the same principle as we use in rural areas, but applied to an urban situation. And this tree actually was also planted in order to help manage water, because one of the springs for the town is directly underneath this tree. The area used to flood, and just over 100 years ago, it was decided they plant a willow tree on there to try and help dry out the ground, and that happened there. So it's exactly the same principle as we see in farmland and in more rural areas. So a really important cultural part of our heritage as well. Pollarding goes back a long way. You can see pollarding on the Bayer tapestry. You can see it going back a long way. It's a very important thing that we need to carry on doing. Lower than pollarding is, of course, coppicing. I found it's quite difficult to get a good photo of a coppice, but I wandered around trying anyway. And this, of course, is cutting it down a bit lower and then collecting those the regrowth. How often you harvest it is dependent on what you want to produce. If you want to make basket weaving, you might do it every year. If you want broom handles, 4 or 5 years. Timber production go a bit longer. So we've got loads of lapse coppice around here. And there's a hazel. This one was even worse, but I took it about 2 hours ago. It looked better at the time. But anyway, just trust me, that's a couple of lovely coppices up on Dove Row Wood. And there's some really good documentation out there as well that backs this up and gives a load of evidence. Some of you will probably be familiar with these documents. I must admit, I wasn't. I have read through them, but I wasn't familiar with them. The Woodland Trust, a great organisation for lots of different reasons, and they seem to have done an awful lot of good material about farming. So here, the role of trees in arable farming, 2015. The section I've just picked out there is about drought and water conservation that we've just talked about. The role of trees in sheep farming, another one from the Woodland Trust and the NSA. And there is probably where I learned earlier on that shelter was good for lambs. So I've just given up my sources there, but it's well worth looking at these up. They're free online if you want to get hold of them. and I can send through any links to people. I'm showing quite a lot of documents in this presentation. You can email me, john@trees.org.uk, and I'll happily send you a load of links or answer any questions. So there we go. Happy, happy livestock under a tree. No better sight in the countryside on a sunny day. Hedges. John was very specific. I had 45 minutes maximum, so I'm going to try my absolute hardest to do that, but I might well cheat and he'll have to come and drag me off the stage. Hedges. I was trying to find an example of a really, really good hedge. Surprisingly quite difficult, but this is an example of a hedge. I'll have to borrow some photos of Ollie because he had some really nice pictures of hedges. But hedges are just wonderful. They're absolutely brilliant things. You all know this, I'm absolutely sure. They connect habitats up. They're fantastic at dealing with pollution, air pollution. They provide a home for 80% of our woodland birds. They provide habitat for hedgehogs, butterflies, dormice, mats. More than 2,000 species in total, I have learned, are supported by hedgerows. And they are the UK's largest priority habitat. They are so, so important. And normally, I'm in the business of talking about individual trees, perhaps groups of trees, but I've fallen in love with a hedgerow. Hedgerows are absolutely brilliant things. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about them later on. And I'm looking forward to learning more from people who know better. And it was nice to see Ollie showing that in his hedge laying, he left a couple of sort of standard trees there as well, and I'm assuming something like that's happened here in the past. You've got some nice mature trees in a line, a bit gappy the hedgerow underneath, but they've had a go. And in the end, I mean, this is just a gratuitous shot of a tree that I really like, but whether or not this was once part of a hedgerow, who knows? Quite possibly on top of that wall. Orchards. I said it's a random run through my mind. I'm just shouting a lot of words that I like about trees, but orchards. This is an orchard not far away from where I'm sat right now, where they've tried to collect all of the heritage varieties of Gloucestershire apple trees and pear trees. Wonderful place to go. Ollie's a very wholesome person. He talked about apple collection. I'm thinking of nothing but cider, and that is what we need to celebrate our orchards for. It's all about cider and apples and community engagement, and of course, a word for the bees. We love the bees. Insects and pollinators. Orchards are just so good for providing habitat. And again, it's a wonderful thing to do alongside the hedges. There's not just bees. This is a photo I took of a lamb or a sheep. I'm not going to get into the terminology with a group of experts. Eating an oak tree, this one, I believe. I was really interested to see a comment from Sally about acorn poisoning. I mention it very briefly later on, but I'd like to find out more about that from you. Someone who knows far more about this than I is a friend of mine, a bit of a hero of mine, Ted Green, who is sort of a tree ecologist, I think we should probably call him. And Ted's always talking about tree hay and using tree hay as fodder and how we should be doing more of that, how we should be making this a part of hedgerow management and coppicing and pollarding. And I told him I was doing this presentation and he sent me some photos and I'm not going to do them justice, so I apologize, Ted. But this is Ted cutting a bit off a tree that he's probably not actually allowed to cut off. And there he is feeding it there to the livestock. And another one of Ted's photos here is eating willow. Ted told me it's willow, and it doesn't look like willow from where I am, but I'm going to go with it anyway. And of course, from willow is where we salix is where we get aspirin, and it's believed, widely believed, the medicinal properties of aspirin. We learnt about that from watching livestock, unwell livestock going off and chewing on the willow, sort of self-medicating with trees. So perhaps we owe the animals a lot more than we maybe give them credit for too. Ancient trees. Well, I could talk all day about ancient trees just because they're absolutely marvelous. This is a favorite of mine, very nearby where I'm sat right now. We've got more ancient trees in the UK than the rest of Europe combined. We have an absolutely incredible resource of ancient trees. They should be regarded as national treasures, national monuments. They are the natural equivalents of cathedrals or some of our battlefields that all have this amazing protection, but our trees don't. They are largely unprotected. These trees are in more rural areas, and a lot of them are on farms. And it is fantastic, again, to hear Ollie, and the fact that all of you are here listening to this makes me assume that you're interested in this kind of thing. So it's great to have all of you wanting to learn about trees, because you are the custodians of these trees. You don't really own them. You're the custodians of them. They've been there a long time before you. They'll be there a long time after you. The problem always, of course, isn't speaking to this audience. This is the easy audience to speak to. The difficult audience to reach is the ones who don't really care about it. And they're the ones who are often doing a lot of the damage. But ancient trees are absolutely wonderful. A little quick detour. Why are there so many ancient trees here and how did they get there? Sometimes we still hear this idea that once upon a time, the UK was carpeted from one end to the other by this continuous canopy forest, and a squirrel could go from Land's End to John O'Groats without touching the ground and all that sort of thing. There's a bit of a different theory. I was going to say recently, but this was 20 years ago now. The Dynamic European Forest, a very important paper published by a great guy called Franz Vera, freely available online again. You should have a read if you're interested. And what Franz said really was that that's probably not the case. You probably wouldn't ever have had that continuous canopy forest. It would have been almost like a woodland pasture. That's what we probably have. And the reason is, he says at the conclusion of that on places where large ungulates, including large grazers like aurochs and tarpan, could roam, the primeval vegetation was not a closed canopy forest. It was a park-like landscape with a high diversity of biotopes and therefore a very high diversity of wildlife. As these little shoots of the trees grew up, as we see now with deer and with livestock as well, they got nibbled off, they got chewed off. You wouldn't have had the opportunity for a completely closed canopy forest because through natural grazing, they'd have kept those trees down. So these trees probably aren't the remnants of some incredible forest that once covered the whole of the country. It's far more likely these trees are just the fortunate survivors, probably planted by something like a jay. Jays are our most prolific planters of trees. Plant them all over the place, and the ones that tend to survive are often the ones that were planted somewhere a little bit more protected. There's a French saying, the bramble is the cradle of the oak, or the bramble is the midwife of the oak. The acorns that get planted out in the open, when those little oaks pop out, they'll quickly get trampled down or bitten off or eaten. If they happen to have been planted in an area protected by brambles, there's a good chance that by the time they emerge, their stems will be thickening up to the point where they can resist the damage that's caused to them, and they're the ones that go on. And in this picture, well, I've tried to show, quite badly it turns out, in the foreground here, you've got a few little oak trees that are just popping up through the brambles, and it's essentially natural regeneration. And this is what felt at the time to be a very artistic photo of a small oak tree in the shadow of a large oak tree. And it took me a long time walking through brambles to take that photo, so I'm going to use it, even if it doesn't really do the job. But there you go. If we want the big trees at the back, we've got to look after those trees at the front. And think about not being so tidy as well. I think farmers around here seem to have got a lot better at this recently, but when dead wood falls, if you can leave it, leave it. Don't clear out all the scrub. Don't clear out all the bramble. I was walking through Doverow Wood earlier on, and just near me, on the way back home, and there was hawthorns all over the place, and the whole lot were covered in redwings. Redwings absolutely everywhere. An ornithologist friend of mine tells me they're just down from Denmark, gorging on whatever berries they can find that's left over. Really important source of habitat, an important source of food. So let's not be too tidy. Let's leave that scrub. Let's leave the scrubland around and try and make sure we're looking after the environment. This is a completely gratuitous picture of an ancient yew tree. It's just about 2,000 years old. It's in a churchyard not far from me, and it's completely irrelevant to this presentation, but I think everybody from time to time should see a beautiful picture of an enormous yew tree. So there you go. That's your one for the day. If you're interested in ancient trees, there is a great resource. I feel like an advert for the Woodland Trust today, but actually they have just done so much good stuff in this area. The Ancient Tree Inventory, it's an online resource. You can go on there, you can look and see what ancient trees are around you. And if you have an ancient tree on your land and it's not recorded on here, you should think about adding it on. You can put it on very easily. They send out some verifiers to have a look, and then it gets added to the list. And the more data we have, the more we can do to look at protecting this incredible natural resource we've got. So do have a look at the Ancient Tree Inventory and consider adding your trees if you've got some. Right, 20 minutes in, I'm probably going to overrun, but shh, don't tell John. It's okay, he can't stop us now. Threats. That's the good news. There's some threats. We've got to be worried as well. Why are we worried? Well, this is a field again on the other side of where I'm sitting. And in this field, there's a sort of relatively small group. You can just see 3 of them here. Oak trees. Nothing massively spectacular. They're probably 200-300 years old. They're kind of middle-aged oak trees. And they've been happily doing their thing for a very long time. But this one in the middle has died. Probably within my lifetime, that's died and then stood there dying for a while. Now, what has happened? What is changing? What are we doing differently so that trees that have lived for 200-300 years quite happily are now suddenly dying? In urban areas, when we see it, it's often because of development, it's because of utility companies cutting through the roots. But here, on the face of it, it's a field. Something should be okay. Some of it's going to be climate change, but is there also things that we're doing, whether it's agricultural practices, social practices, that are now starting to have an effect on trees that it wasn't being had before? I was having a little bit of a play with Google Maps, because I'm that sort of person. And this is a farm near me. Now, I should say I'm not being critical of any farmers or farms at all. This is purely observational. But there's a really nice little resource online if you're a bit sad like me, and it's called Know Your Place. And Know Your Place is a thing online. It covers a lot of the Southwest. I'm not sure how far it extends, but you can overlay maps from the sort of mid to late 1800s with Google Maps. And it's just quite interesting to see the different shape of the roads and the rivers and everything where they all were. And in these maps in the 1800s, they were incredibly accurate with their trees. They plotted out individual trees. If there was a tree big enough that seemed worthy to go on the map, they plotted it out. And I think all of them on this map are actually broadleafs. Oh no, there are a couple of conifers. So sort of, I don't know if you can see my cursor or not, but I'll kind of do that. If there was a conifer, they drew a little conifer. And if it was a broadleaf, they drew a little broadleaf. So they're really, really great. And it can help you track through how things have changed. So this is an area I will draw your attention to first, highlighted in red. I believe this was an orchard, and it looks like it probably was. Lots and lots and lots and lots of trees. This is what it looks like now. No trees. Or if you're on the ground looking up, there's one very fine oak tree at the top. There's a couple of new trees have been planted. Just the way the photo was cropped, you can only see one. But that is a field that used to be full of trees and now doesn't have any trees in it. We've gone from this to this in a relatively short space of time. That can't be good, surely. And you know that we can use it for an orchard and something else at the same time, can't we? But for some reason, this is now just a field. On the same map, you can see this hedge line down here. And at the time of this map, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 trees, big enough to apparently warrant inclusion on the map. And this is that area now. There's 4 there, one from the Google Maps not looking great. And I walked along there just yesterday, and you can see there are 4 trees there. One of them is dead, and some of them are declining. We would often expect trees to start retrenching, dying back from the top. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but these trees aren't doing particularly well. And again, how have we gone from 7 trees big enough to be recorded in the late 1800s to 3 living ones not in great shape now? And the final tree from this map is this one here. You can see it on the Google map, and I showed a picture of it earlier on. It's this incredible, huge oak tree, the one at the beginning of the presentation that looked a bit like a skull. It really is a magnificent tree. But in the background, you can see there's been a little bit of excavation. There's a little fence. And why is this one at threat? Well, a water pipe was run through, a big water pipe restoration project or some such. And this is just from Google Street View, but they excavated all the way through past that tree. Now, that is not the way we treat things like this. If you tried to do this past Gloucester Cathedral, you'd probably get in a lot of trouble if you were digging through all their underground bits. But this is fine because it's just a tree. It's just a 700-year-old tree that we can go and do whatever we like with because it's not protected. Another incredible oak tree not too far from here. And you can see there's a lot of damage been done under here by people, by being driven over by farm vehicles. I think, again, I'm not blaming the farmer, please. If you're looking at this and you know the farmer or you are the farmer, I'm not being critical. I'm just pointing things out and wondering how we can do things differently together, learning together going forward. Because this isn't what that tree wants. This tree really wants to have a nice open root area. We know that everyone knows that roots need water to survive, but roots also need oxygen to survive. If you compact the ground under a tree, you close those macropores, they can't get oxygen in there, and the roots can go into decline, and the whole tree can go into decline. So again, a tree that's been there, I don't know, 400-500 years, maybe this one, in the last 50 years, 100 years, lots of traffic, not lots of traffic, but regular traffic going through there, undoubtedly going to be causing damage to this tree. It's not just vehicles, of course, it's also livestock. I'm not entirely sure what goes in here. I think it might be cows in here, but all gathering under the tree. I said it's a lovely thing to see at the start. It is a lovely thing to see. It's great to see livestock under the trees, but they can also compact the soil. This isn't really the environment a tree wants to be in. And this is another tree in Stonehouse, not in a farm, but in a park. And you can see the water's falling on the soil there. It should be permeating straight through. It should be going down to the roots, but it's not. It's sitting on the surface. And this was quite a long time after the rain as well. So it was much, much worse. This is compacted ground. We're not a million miles away from the conditions that we're putting these trees in the urban area into. We've got to think about the soil. We've got to think about how the tree is able to function properly if its roots are being killed off. This is an incredible sycamore. Lots of people don't like sycamores. I think they're weeds. I've already mentioned Ted Green. He says we've got to rebrand it the Celtic maple. And I think that's a good rebrand that we could all get behind. A wonderful, wonderful sycamore. It's always difficult to show the size of trees from photographs, but this is the stem of that tree. Those sort of what used to be epicormic branches almost coming off are the size of small to medium sized sycamores. This is an enormous tree. It's absolutely wonderful. Definitely not a weed, a spectacular open grown tree. But again, look at all that dieback in the center of it. It's really struggling. That's only happened in the last couple of years. I'm not entirely sure why, but you can see down in the bottom left, the cattle trough there, lots and lots of animals gather under this tree, and it must be having an effect on the soil and the compaction. So we've got to try and find a balance. There must be a way to balance the competing needs of trees and livestock, and to find that actually they all kind of want the same thing, really. One of the problems is a lack of understanding. I still see a lot of pictures like this of showing the root systems of trees. This is not what the root system of a tree looks like. The root system of a tree is not a mirror of what's above the ground. The taproot will not be holding the tree up indefinitely. This isn't what it looks like at all. I was going to try and get a photo to represent this, and I didn't get round to it, sorry, but we talk in arboriculture about the root protection area. The area around a tree that is sort of shouldn't be damaged, shouldn't be excavated, should be protected where possible. And the way we represent that, bear with me, it's a circle around the tree, and that circle has got a radius 12 times the diameter of the stem. Okay, so put simply, if the diameter of stem is, say, 1 meter, for 12 meters away from that tree, that's the root protection area. That's what we should be looking to protect. Okay, a much, much bigger area than people think, and much shallower. The vast majority of roots are found in the top 60 centimeters of the soil, particularly in urban areas, but also in rural areas. They spread out, they go wide. They don't always go deep. If they don't have to go deep, they won't. It's a lot of effort to go deep, so they go wide. So a long way out for a tree, 1 meter diameter, 12 meters out is where you want to be protected. We see a lot of this. We see a lot of ploughing, sometimes immediately up to the base of trees. This is what, about 1 meter away. They are going to have absolutely devastated a load of the roots there. Now, surely there must be a way to just move slightly further away and make sure these trees are going to be there for the long haul. These ones here on a little island of unplowed soil, they've gone all the way around them. These root zones have been really severely compromised by this. And again, it would just be really nice if we could find some way of sort of working together for the good of the farm and for the good of the trees as well. I keep checking the time just to make sure I don't get shouted at. God, I've only got about 17 minutes left. Right, another photograph. I just wanted to acknowledge, really, and as I said, Sally mentioned it in the chat earlier on, trees can be bad for things sometimes too. Not my area of expertise, but I'm aware, of course, yews are extremely poisonous. Things eating yew trees don't tend to do too well at the end of it. They're very poisonous trees. Sycamores are linked to atypical myopathy in horses. Similarly, there's acorn poisoning of cattle and sheep. I'd really like to learn more from you, as I said earlier on, about that. It does make me wonder whether or not, if you've got a big oak tree in a field that's got cattle in it, could we fence off the oak tree in a way that protects the cattle and also protects the tree? It feels like that would be good for everything, but I'm sure if it was that simple, we'd have done it. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. But trees can cause problems. Of course they can. Hedges, this isn't a very good photo either. It's the best one I could do. This used to be a lovely hedge all the way along here, and then someone decided to smash it with, I think they actually used an excavator and you can't really see it. This is where the hedge used to be. On the right is the sort of little gap through the hedge you can go. And on the left, there's a few shoots coming back, but they absolutely mullered this hedge. Just terrible. We're losing hedges at an astounding rate. This is another map I was playing with. It took me ages to color it in, so I'm going to show you anyway. Randomly took, this is a completely random sample, but these are the hedge lines that were visible at the sort of mid to late 1800s. And these are the hedge lines now. And you can see on this map, the red bits, as far as I can see from the map, the red bits is the hedges we've lost. So supposedly the statistics tell us we've lost about 50% of all of our hedges since the mid 1940s. Apparently 60% of the hedges we do have are not in a good condition. Hedges are vital. Farmers play a vital role in looking after them. The Climate Change Committee has estimated that the UK needs to increase our hedgerows by 40% if we're going to help offset some of the effects of the climate crisis. That's their target. And again, farmers are going to be playing a crucial role in that. Pests and diseases is another threat to trees I could talk about all day, but definitely don't have time. But this is elm. This is how we see elm now, unfortunately. Dutch elm disease decimated, or more than decimated, destroyed our elm trees. And that's what it looks like on the inside. How did Dutch elm get here? It got here because we were transporting cheap commodities around the world. And as a result, we spread diseases that should never have been able to reach the UK. We've done it several times. We keep doing it. We don't learn. Biosecurity is absolutely crucial, particularly when you're buying trees. If you're going to plant trees, think about where they're coming from. Source them from UK grown nurseries, or if they've been imported, make sure they've gone through an appropriate period of quarantine. Okay, Dutch elm disease didn't need to get here. Oak processionary moth didn't need to get here. Not a problem in my part of the world at the moment, but down in the southeast it certainly is. This is less of a tree health problem actually, and more of a human health problem. Basically, the caterpillars are covered in toxic hairs that can cause respiratory problems and a horrible rash. Really unpleasant caterpillar. That again didn't need to be here. It was imported into the country in imported saplings that probably didn't need to be imported in the first place, and it's now trying to spread across the whole country. And of course, the classic at the moment that everyone's aware of, ash dieback. Maybe not quite as bad as you've heard. I'm going to stick my neck out and say that. I've heard all sorts of numbers being thrown about. 95% of all the ash are going to die. We're going to lose them all. We're not going to lose them all. We've been doing a lot of work, we as an industry, learning from our colleagues internationally, learning particularly from the Danes. In Denmark, they're about 10 years ahead of us in terms of the cycle of ash dieback, and they've been very, very accurate in predicting what we would see. It gets here, it becomes established, it looks like Armageddon. All the trees look like they're dying, but the trees that are dying are the ones that have no natural resistance whatsoever. We have very good genetic diversity of ash in this country. It's not like the elm, which was very limited genetic diversity. We've got a strong genetic diversity of ash. A lot of ash trees will end up being resistant and will come back. So it is important, it's serious, it's something to worry about, but it might not be as bad as we've heard. Ash support more than 1,000 species of birds, insects, lichen. They're still valuable when they're dead. Only cut them down when you have to. Consult a professional. We'll talk a bit about that in the 10 minutes I've got left, but take a proportionate approach. Please don't cut down ash trees unless you have to cut them down. Don't cut down healthy ash trees just because you're worried that you might in the future get ash dieback. There's great guidance available online. The one on the left is from the Arbor Association. The one on the right is from the Tree Council. Please don't overreact. We've got to think about how we're going to protect this incredibly important species. So this is a picture possibly from a bank hedging, I suspect, but absolutely beautiful. This was down in Devon somewhere. I can't quite remember where. But this is really just to start a brief conversation about roadside trees. A lot of farms have trees along roadsides. That can be concerning to farmers because it does bring with it a certain degree of responsibility and liability should something go wrong. I would direct your attention to a document, again, freely available online, Common Sense Risk Management of Trees. There's 5 principles to this that I'm going to rattle through very quickly. The first one is trees provide benefits. They're good. The second one is trees are living organisms. They can die, they can fail, they can go into decline. But number 3, the overall safety risk is very low. Number 4, tree owners have a duty of care, a legal duty of care. But the important 1.5, Tree owners have to take a balanced and proportionate approach to tree safety management. If you want to remove the risk, cut down all of the trees, but that's clearly not reasonable. It's clearly not proportionate, because you're going to lose all the benefits and all the great things that trees do. But equally, you can't just leave them there and not do anything. You should have them inspected. You should take care and consideration and think about what's going to happen if something does go wrong with one of your trees. So consult an expert would always be my advice. And the final threat to trees I was going to mention is tree planting schemes. That might sound counterintuitive. I could whine about this from my soapbox all day long, but all of these ridiculous targets, 1 million trees, 1 billion trees, 1 trillion trees, it's nonsense. Most of it's greenwashing. You might even end up looking at a situation like this, where they've planted so many trees, they've had to cut down some mature trees in order to make space to plant the new trees underneath. There's no points for retaining trees. There's only points for planting trees. Planting trees is great, but not at the expense of other things. A field of plastic sheaths with little, sticks next to them isn't necessarily the best way to go about it. So I would say that some of these mass tree planting schemes are actually threats to the successful future and establishment of trees. Tree planting should be sustainable. It should be about tree establishment as well as just planting. And then look at that, I've got like 9 minutes. This is amazing. Now I've gone too fast. Anyway, some possible solutions. This, I guess, it looks like a plug for the Arbor Association. It's not. We're a charity. We're not here to make money. It's a plug for arboriculture as a whole. There is an entire profession out there devoted to tree care, from nursery production through to the contractors, the consultants, the tree officers, policymakers, community groups, researchers, educators, a whole profession about tree care, arboriculture. It's just our great problem that no one's ever heard of it and no one knows what we do. There are arboriculturists out there you can engage. You can speak to approved contractors. You can speak to registered consultants. You can talk to your local tree officer. You can even speak to people who've got a specific certificate in veteran tree management, the new Vet Cert, which is a really, really good thing that's hopefully going to take off soon. So giving these ancient trees really the care and attention they need. So there's loads more information on the Arbor Association website, but you've not got to work all this out by yourself. There's experts out there, arboriculturalists, and they're all, of course, marvelous people. And use networks like this, Pasture for Life. This is a knowledge sharing experience. Speak to your colleagues, learn from things like this, not so much from me, people like Ollie I'm thinking of, and learn about doing things a bit differently. Share knowledge. That's what's so important. There's potential solutions in deadwood. Of course, dead trees can be very dangerous, but they can also be fantastic. This is rotting down. It's providing absolutely brilliant biodiversity value. When it falls down, it's going to carry on providing brilliant biodiversity value. It's not really getting any way. It's not causing any massive problems. Here's a tree I passed day before yesterday. You can see what I think might even be owl holes now, but previously was woodpeckers, I think, but seems to have been opened up more. It wouldn't surprise me if there was owls in there. It's just great for biodiversity. Embrace the culture. The Woodland Trust, again, I should get paid every time I mention them, is doing a very, very good project at the moment called Living Legends, engaging people who are the custodians of these incredible ancient trees, who are often farmers, as I said. And this is the website. If you Google Living Legends, it'll come up. They've done lots of case studies speaking to farmers about the trees that they've got on their land, how they look after them, what they mean to them. These things are culturally significant. You will never stand in front of a living thing as old as a tree. We take them for granted, but they really are extremely cool. They're very old. They link us to our past. They'll be there into our future, provided we look after them properly. And the Living Legends campaign is a really nice example of how we can engage people. And another good document from the Woodland Trust, I'm going to try not to mention them again, I'm just going over the top now, the Ancient and Veteran Tree Management, written by Emma Gill-Martin. It's a really good document and it's available online again. And it just tells you a bit more, probably a version of what I've just said, but just a bit more professional, I should imagine. Yes, we've got to start respecting our ancient trees. Hedge restoration, of course, is something else we can do as a potential solution. The Tree Council have done some great work on this. The Mind the Gap campaign, Life on the Hedge, see what they did there. I like it. We can look at hedge restoration. There's lots of resources available. Recreating those corridors, filling in the gaps, helping wildlife, capturing carbon. And as again we saw in Ollie's presentation, when you're doing hedge laying, leave some of the individual trees. All this stuff can work together in a way that benefits all of it. So hedge laying also, I think, culturally very, very important. This is a kind of rural skills that we should be teaching more people, getting people involved with. Otherwise, you all know this, but these things will die off. If we don't respect them and pass them on, this knowledge and this wisdom, it's going to die off. We're sort of throwing away our own culture here unless we start making sure we give it a bit more respect. And good tree planting is possible. It doesn't all have to be plastic tubes and everything. You can plant good trees. This is a document the Arb Association wrote mainly for people in urban areas, I guess, but the principles apply the same. Where should you plant a tree? What should you plant? How should you plant it? How do you look after it after it's gone in the ground? And again, this one's available online for free as well. I'll just quickly throw out there as well, we're still fighting the native, non-native debate. Some people still saying non-native trees are evil. Rubbish. In urban areas particularly, we must diversify our tree species. We've only got about 30 native tree species, depending on how you count them. Only half a dozen of them get to a large canopy, and most of them have got pest and disease problems. With climate change, with pests and diseases, with the biodiversity crisis, we have to diversify our tree stock. So non-native trees, as long as they're properly procured, should definitely be an option. And we're seeing that a little bit more now in rural areas. Things like, what do we see? Obviously horse chestnut and sycamore, but also walnuts, various different things starting to be used. And hopefully we can encourage that where it's appropriate to do so. Native trees are great. I love them, but we need to think about diversification, because what's doing well here now and what was doing well here 500 years ago probably won't be doing well here in 500 years time. We've got to think in tree time. We've got to think what it's going to be like a long, long way into the future. And of course, tree planting isn't the only way to get new trees anyway. Nature's been really good at planting trees for a very long time before we came along with our shiny spades and our plastic guards. This is in some ways a bit of a sad story, but this is a hill. It's called Verney. It's just behind my house, actually, in Gloucestershire. And this used to have cattle on it all the time, and it looked very much like this, but a bit shorter grass. And then lots of people started taking their dogs on there and decided that they didn't want to clean up after their dogs. And this, as you know better than I, causes huge problems for the cattle. And unfortunately, the farmer who was grazing this land took the cattle off. And the cattle went away. And then what started to happen is the landscape's changing. And we're seeing all these little oak trees that used to pop up in the grass and then either get crushed or nibbled off or eaten. They're now coming up. They're starting to establish themselves. And they're going from these little seedlings that once would have lasted a very, very short space of time indeed, becoming more established, not just the ones covered by bramble. And quite quickly, just in the last few years, the character of this little landscape is changing. Now, I actually quite like it the way it was. I'm all for woodland, but it's nice to have this diversity as well and different kinds of, like, this more open pasture. But the point is, it is possible to let nature do its thing without planting lots and lots of trees. Unfortunately, when we do these governmental targets, people don't particularly like. Pen, I've just had an email from you saying you're enjoying my talk. I'm still doing the talk. I'm delighted. I'm delighted. That's the best feedback I've had so quickly. Thank you. We need to make sure that we're giving this some thought, because it's going to be a completely different landscape in 10, 20 years time. Is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? I don't know, but we need to think about it. But it's good news that we don't need to actively plant trees. We can let nature do its work. Well, I've got like 1 minute left, so that's perfect. So I'll just sum up. There's not really any conclusions. It's just been me rambling for 45 minutes. But essentially, trees are really, really good. They do loads of good stuff. They do good stuff for us. They do good stuff for wildlife, and they do good stuff for farms. So they really are worth integrating into your work. And again, I'm so grateful to Ollie for his work and what he's doing, because it hopefully has given you all some good ideas. There are threats, there's problems to face. We've got to tackle those problems, and there's ways to do that. And the main way to tackle those threats is through collaboration, through getting expert advice, through working together, trying to think a little bit differently. There's loads of resources out there. As I've said, you can email me, john@trees.org.uk, and I'll happily send you links to them. That's a little nice picture of a sort of sunsetty type tree that I felt I should squeeze in somewhere. And almost perfectly on time, I will say thank you so much for listening. My email address is there. The Arb Association website is there. And I would happily discuss trees and farms all day long. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, John, very much. That's fascinating. And I recognize some of the places locally, a few of which we've actually walked together. I think it would be interesting if perhaps you and also Daisy Brassington, because I see you've been on the talking on the chat box. What kinds, when your members, both of you, one's the association and consultants, to what extent do they get onto farms? And when they do, what kind of things do they do? What are the kind of issues that they're either asked to deal with or want to get onto farms to address? John, perhaps could you go first and then Daisy?
Yeah, I mean, Daisy will probably be able to say better than I can as a consultant, but I don't hear a lot from my colleagues who are consultants about being called onto farms. I'm not sure why that is. I don't know if it's perceived as by some tree owners, and I should say not just farmers, but some landowners generally, as being a bit expensive or a bit unnecessary. I know that we perhaps don't get as many trained arborists as we'd like going out to work on farms. And I see a lot of the time, maybe because a lot of farmers are very practical, very outdoorsy people, incredibly capable of lots of different things, that sometimes means they think, well, I'll whack a rope around it and get it on the back of the tractor and do one cut with the saw and take it out. It's not necessarily great for the tree, but it's just so dangerous. It's so incredibly, incredibly dangerous. And we want to make people make sure people are safe as well. So I don't know how many times I called out, but I'd love to see more professional arborists and professional consultants called out to get involved in tree management on farms.
That's great. Daisy, would you like to comment?
Thanks. Yeah, just a bit on the spot. I'm not actually a consultant, though. I work at the consultancy practice doing communication stuff and also research and innovation stuff. But the consultants mainly, I feel, get called out to roadside surveys. So where farms butt up against main roads, then we get called out to do tree condition surveys to help mitigate against owner-occupier liability in case something will happen against a roadside place. And often in the case that there's going to be development, if new barns are being considered and stuff like that, then they'll also be called out for development that requires a BS 5837 survey to accompany it. That's the sort of thing.
Right. I mean, these seem to be mainly precautionary things, people sort of protecting themselves against the law or the plan.
At the moment, I think that the laws definitely help to get consultants into certain situations. That certainly seems to be the case. It would be really nice to see more proactive kind of management stuff. I think perhaps me at Crown, I couldn't speak. We're a family-sized consultancy. There are many wonderful professionals out there who do a lot more like management of large-scale forestry type, and I think maybe John might be able to say a bit more about that. Yeah, there's just more. There's such diversification within the types of consultancy that are available even within the arboricultural industry. Sorry, my words.
I mean, in terms for farmers as distinct from landowners, and I know they can be the same, but the margins are so tight in farming. And I was talking with a young person who'd just done the soil food web, and they wanted to get on farm making compost and all the rest of it. And I was saying, well, you need to think in terms of what's the benefit to the farmer going to be if he spends £250, 500 quid or on your time having an analysis and these kinds of things.
Yeah.
How is he going to get that money back? And that could be in terms of boxes of eggs or sales of pigs, or you know what I mean. That's an area I think we can't do it now, but I think it'd be really good to try and explore.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that personally. I'd be really interested to hear what farmers want from tree management. That's kind of why I'm listening in these kind of situations to hear what might come up.
Ollie, would you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I've got a comment. I would certainly say the two examples where we've brought professionals in. Number one is with the restorative pruning of this ancient apple, which we want to save. We want to make the right decisions. And I felt that was well above my skill level. So just, pulling some specialist help in to get the best out of that situation. And the other one is partnership working. Obviously, farmers' budgets are very tight, as you've said, but we worked with the Rivers Trust to reduce this tunnelling and the debris load that was in the river, and they funded. So if you can look out for key opportunities, and certainly where these veteran trees are concerned, under the stewardship prescription, there is a veteran tree option. So you'd have to be talking with Natural England about putting that into your land management option, if that's something that needs to be done.
And Ollie, have you had any funding for this, or are there funding sources? Because that, if you want to get specialist tree people onto farms, and there is a cost, either it comes out of the farm's cash flow, which can be quite tight, or it can come from some other funding sources. Have you identified such sources?
Well, certainly the Woodland Trust will be helping us with our silvo pasture, and the higher level stewardship that we had covered the costs of the bank restoration and the hedgerow plantings. Yeah, alternatively, I would say this partnership working with other agencies, I mean, it's going to be third sector budget money, but yeah, if you've got something special on the farm habitat that needs looking after, then you need to be pulling in people who have a vested interest in it. I'd be struggling to yeah.
Can I ask a question? Do you think, maybe to John, I guess, do you think that tree consultants should be getting more involved with planting schemes generally, especially landscape scale planting schemes? And do you know whether they are, whether that is kind of becoming common practice now or not?
I don't know of many cases where that's happening now. I think
I know the
unfortunately,
Forestry Commission are involved, but
well, yeah, I think tree planting is often seen as it's difficult, isn't it? Tree planting is seen as an activity that anyone can do, and technically it is an activity anyone can do. And there's nothing better. Community planting days where lots of people get out and plant trees, that is absolutely brilliant. But what we maybe should be looking at it is actually a tree is an incredible piece of kit that is quite cheap to buy, goes in the ground in a particular way, then increases in value every day for the next few centuries, delivering more and more benefits to people. Should we really just be chucking it in the ground, without sort of thinking about it? And that's bigger rural schemes, but also I see it all the time in landscaping schemes and in developments and even on the streets and everything. So I don't think consultants are necessarily getting involved. What I'd love to see is, I guess, almost more professionalism in tree planting in general. It's seen as an add-on that anyone can do, rather than the really specialist skill that it is.
That's interesting, because there's a grant for the woodland creation. There's many different woodland creation grants out there, and for one of them there is a grant available to help you through your schemes, and I kind of expected to see arboricultural consultants being contacted in that capacity, but I haven't. It's not something that we're getting so much involved with in Crown. It's just something that I've been personally ruminating on. So yeah, I wonder whether there's really a place for more professional assistance, and that should be funded from some of these woodland creation schemes, so that the farmer doesn't have to fork out up front for that. No. Anyway, I'm going to mute myself because I've got very much involved at the end of this chat, but I'll
Thanks, Daisy.
It's been a pleasure talking to you all.
John, can I make a comment, if I could, about the you talked about the sort of maintenance and the cost associated with maintenance, why it's difficult, because I think ash dieback is a really, really good example of that, sometimes where the sort of theory meets the reality a bit, because you see loads of situations, for example, where you'll have farmland with a load of ash trees in a hedge that are adjacent to a road. Okay. And we know that a lot of ash are going to die, but some are going to survive. And it's those ones that survive which are going to provide our genetic stock of ash trees for the future. So we don't want to be cutting them down preemptively. So we want to say to the farmer, okay, only cut down the tree that's showing signs of ash dieback, and keep inspecting that tree every year, and retain the ones that aren't too bad or that aren't showing signs of it, and then keep doing that over the course of the next 10 years. Now, that's lovely in theory, and it's great for me to say that in my capacity as an arboriculturalist. If I was a farmer and I had 10 ash trees and one of them got ash dieback and was clearly dying, and I had to get them cut down, and I've got to pay for road closures, professional inspections, maybe consultants, maybe arborists to come in and do it, I'm probably going to have the lot down in one hit, because that is cheaper, it's easier, it's much quicker, and the risk is much lower. And I guess the trick is, we need to be supporting landowners, including farmers, to manage their trees properly. Because a lot of the time, I think it's not because they don't want to do it properly or because they don't know how to do it properly. It's because how can they be expected to do it properly when it can cost a lot of money and when they've got so much other stuff on? These are public goods delivering public benefits to people and should quite possibly be contributed, their care being contributed by public money.
Thank you. I'm wondering whether it might be useful, John, to get together a small group of arborists or arboriculturalists, whichever is the right phrase, and a small group of farmers online, I mean, including Ollie, and I can think of others who are very much in this world, really just to, not in an open session, but just to chew the fat for an hour. The farmers talk about what their concerns are, and the arborists talk about what their things, because I'm really keen that we should find a way to bring together the skills that there are within your world, and the people managing the land, who here, and maybe we can talk about that separately. That's one possibility. I also see Alexandra has put a lovely thing in about if you want to look at different root systems, there are drawings there online, and I hope when we have the recording, we can have a recording of the chat box as well. Yeah, well, we're getting towards the end. I just want to say this is the first, I hope, of many interactions between the tree people and farmers. And as I said right at the beginning, John, we've got some wonderful things going on farms. We can see with Ollie what Ollie's doing, wonderful things. But we sort of live in the world where farmers share their knowledge with each other, and I'd like to find a way that we can open the dialogue more and find a way that it's we can get tree people onto farms and find a way that they can be paid, because ultimately everyone's got to make a living out of this. So I think that's everything. I'd like to thank John. I'd like to thank Ollie very much for sharing their knowledge and experience with us. There will be a recording. The chat box will be there. John and I bumped into John at the station the other night, local station. So I think the dialogue will continue anyway. And I'd like to thank Charlotte for dealing with all the techie stuff, because if I'd had to deal with it, it would have been a disaster. So Charlotte, anything you want to say before we leave?
No, that's it. You'll get an email with the link to the recording when it does come out. So thank you very much to the speakers and for John for organising.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm sure this is the beginning of something really, really interesting. Thank you for everybody who participated. Thank you and good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.